I call the
Great.
meeting to order. Kendall, if you could go ahead and read the statement.
Sure. Okay. Pursuant to the declared state of emergency in the Commonwealth of Virginia in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and to protect the public health and safety of committee members, staff, and the general public, the CAC meeting will be held electronically. These electronic meetings are required to complete essential business on behalf of our region. Per the requirements of the Code of Virginia, we posted the meeting notice, agenda, and supporting documentation on our organization's website for public review. We also provided electronic copies of this information to our committee members and other interested parties. A recording is being made of today's meeting and will be posted on our organizational websites as well. Additionally, the meeting is being live streamed and is available for viewing on the HRTPO and HRPDC live stream and YouTube channels, as well as the HRTPO and HRPDC websites. The general public was provided with the opportunity to provide comments on today's meeting agenda via two options: email or a dedicated phone line. For this particular meeting, no public comments were received within 48 hours of the meeting itself. Before we begin today's meeting, I would like to review a few housekeeping rules which are important as we complete this remote meeting. Number one, we ask that all committee members remain in mute on their phones and computers until they are providing input. Okay. After speaking, please put your phone back on mute. Number two, please identify yourself when speaking by providing your name, and please do the same should you provide a motion or a second. Number three, all votes taken today must be made by roll call vote and recorded in the minutes. And lastly, on behalf of the HRPDC and TPO staff, we want to thank you for your commitment to our region and your cooperation and patience as we work through this electronic meeting format.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, you've already said there are no public comments.
Yes, ma'am. There are none.
Okay. That takes care of 3 items. Okay, we need the approval of the agenda.
Terry just froze.
I know.
Well, I think she was looking for a motion for approval of the agenda. Is that what she needs?
Yes, she was.
Yeah,
So
moved.
Okay, I second Diana's motion.
Okay. Bob? I would like to take roll call, Bob. Are you okay with that with Terry? Should we wait for her to come back?
I think with respect to the chair, we should wait till we're able to
Okay,
get our
no
chair
problem.
back on a second.
Okay.
Kendall, if we could. Looks like our chair is probably going to try to dial back in. Ms.
I'm back.
Fantastic.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Madam Chair, Madam Chair, can you hear us okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, you have a motion and a second by Delcino Miles and by Diana Howard for approval of the agenda that occurred just when you froze up there. So I'll forward back over to you if you would like to call that vote, and then I think Kendall would like to do a roll call if that's okay.
Are there any objections to approving the minutes?
It's just the agenda, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, the agenda, sorry. Okay, there being no objections, the minutes, the agenda is approved. Okay, has everybody had a chance to read the minutes? Anybody want to make a motion to approve the minutes?
Can I make a point of order?
Yes.
We're discussing the minutes. Do we have to vote to approve it before having a discussion on it?
I asked, what we need is a motion, and then once there's a motion and a second, we can discuss it. So
okay, good. So I'll make the motion.
So do I
second it, Delcino. I second the motion.
Okay. Delcino, you seconding?
Yes, ma'am. I second Diana's motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, are there any corrections to the minutes?
Yes.
Go ahead,
I
Diane.
had a problem with reading the minutes. It's almost like I wasn't even at the meeting. It's possible because of this whole Zoom thing, and I don't like to be physically seen. So I may not have, I was there and then I wasn't there or whatever. I know that during the first two presentations, I probably didn't have much to say. But during the HRBT and the tunnel thing, I know I had a lot to say, and I tried to speak at one time and I got muted, and I was busy chatting there, and I know Bob was looking down at my chats, but I'm just saying, I wasn't in the minutes at all, except for being present. I don't know if anybody else had that problem with trying to get heard, but wasn't.
I think that what we have is a somewhat condensed version of the meeting. I would suggest that perhaps rather than approve the minutes right now, we go back and look and see if there is anything that we might want to add.
Well, I wouldn't know what to add because I went back and viewed the whole meeting, and you can't even see anything I said in the chat. So I don't remember what I said in the chats.
And
But
I'd be
I know
happy to review and help out. If you would like to see included, then we can certainly look at that.
Madam Chair,
Yeah, go ahead, Kendall.
if it's not said in the meeting, I'm not clear on whether or not we can include what is written in chat in minutes.
Well,
So
I went to speak and I
Yes.
was muted, and nobody ever came in back and said, did you have a question or anything like that?
I understand.
Just ignored, except for
just-
that's why I was chatting.
Just from an administrative angle, that's all I'm speaking to. We do summary minutes now. We do not do in-depth minutes because we post the live video. There are minutes in relation. The video is actually a verbatim of everything that is spoken. That in connection with the summary minutes, we do not verbatim every word each member says. We do not put every word in the minutes because we have the actual literal meeting posted. Again, we do summary minutes. And so I understand, so you're saying that because you were muted, no one got back to you, you were unable to voice your thoughts.
My question or whatever, right?
And then therefore, and I don't know how we're going to address that in these minutes. But
Well, I have a suggestion, and that is that at the end of the minutes, we put a link to the meeting itself so that people, if they want to.
Yeah, we do. But
Is it in the?
Terry,
Oh,
do you think that, you know what, we'll talk. Because I definitely understand in this new environment that members, may not, I don't know. We'll talk. It's just
Maybe you couldn't see me because I would be like on the screen and then I would be off the screen, and then I would be on the screen and then I was off. And maybe you couldn't see me, I don't know. But I know I unmuted and said something, and then I got muted with one word out.
Okay. George?
Yes, if we can go ahead and get the minutes approved, whatever we're going to do, and then I've kind of made some notes referring to the last meeting and several of the Zoom meetings, and I'd like to kind of put that out there because I think we're getting a little bit astray of our mission.
Well, we can discuss that before we. It's pertaining. Hello?
Yes.
Okay. I would suggest that be included in our conversation right now because
okay,
that's related to this topic, and we haven't finished the topic. So
okay, the notes I kind of took to myself after the meeting was under the general area of general accretion of scope for the CAC, especially considering the infrequency of the CAC meetings, and I have serious concerns of the roles of the CAC expansion, our effectiveness, and our primary mission of monitoring and communicating plans to improve transportation in our region has already deteriorated. When it was proposed that the CAC expand into the review and providing input into plans to identify and correct areas of serious concern outside of transportation in our area, I initially bought into that. But that was when it appeared that we were actually going to develop a Pareto list of the top issues holding back progress in the Hampton roads. Those concerns would include transportation, poor schools, insufficient or low-paying jobs, constantly increasing taxes with little quality of life improvements to make the added payments acceptable, and talent and youth flight from the region. But those topics seem to have been co-opted and replaced by, not to make anybody mad, frivolous programs to paper over the problems instead of fixing them, and using the CAC more as a rubber stamp HR Glee Club to advance Chamber of Commerce agenda to make the area appear attractive to businesses and visitors without actually doing the hard work of actually initiating quality of life changes that might attract people for substantive rather than superficial advertising reasons. I see a twofold problem: the expansion of the CAC scope into areas that municipal public affairs people are already doing, duplication of effort, seemingly lending credibility to these efforts that really don't accomplish anything because their initiatives are all form over substance, and two, scattering the attention of the CAC, covering superfluous Chamber of Commerce advertising and failing to spend sufficient time on actual transportation plans, progress, and alternatives. How much of my frustration over the recent VDOT briefing on the details of the 2011 ERC contract details and the upcoming sale to another international consortium was due to the fact that neither VDOT, CAC, HRTPO, or HRTAC, or any of the regional leaders advising the HRPDC or Richmond have done anything more than anything that may have resulted in a recommendation that the Commonwealth terminate the commercial contract for convenience by buying the contract back into the contract holder. Now, I'll admit, most of you are well aware of the details, but I've only been on this commission or advisory board for a limited time. Had that been the case, and had I understood that the only effective way out of the contract was so valuable to the contract holder and so economically damaging to the people of Hampton roads over the 58-year life of the contract award, I suspect many of us could have ensured that the local populations that we're responsible for keeping informed would have known much more about the economic risk involved if the Commonwealth didn't do anything to terminate the contract and assume the burden of paying it off. And I'll just drop it there, but those are my concerns.
Yeah, I understand. I do want to point out that part of our operation has to do with what is going on the HRTPO board and the PDC. That a lot of our agenda is determined by what they are dealing with, because we are supposed to be advising them on those things, which is not to say that we can't have our own agenda items, which we have asked for over time, and staff has responded as they can. Diana, you had something? Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Diana, go ahead, and then Christian.
Well, I kind of had the, a similar feeling to George, because it was like when we did 757 branding. When we first wanted to get on with the PDC and everything, it was the broadband issue, wind energy, what do you call it? Sea level rise. These were things that we were like, yeah, let's do that. But now we're getting stuff on, let's buy local, advertising, wash your hands, 757. When are we going to have presentations and discussions on the important things?
Well, I think that's something we can work on. Bob or Kendall did. Oh, hang on, Christian, you wanted to say something, and then George.
No, sorry for the confusion. I don't.
Okay, George.
Yeah, the broadband issue, if I may, for Suffolk is turning out to be a major issue now, and we haven't addressed that in like 9 months. We're hearing rumors that the school district won't put out any numbers and won't tell anybody. And when someone put in a FOIA request, they says, we'll answer it, but it'll cost you $3,000. The rumors are that over 40% of the students in the county of Suffolk, which is, as you know, 430 square miles, aren't even logging in because they don't have capability of logging in. So they're essentially denying up to 40% based on, again, anecdotal information, because no one's going to put out anything and our city council hasn't asked for it, are being denied in education, and they're not going to catch up from that. So, the broadband issue is really now looms much bigger than it did when it was first presented. I'll drop that.
Okay. I'm going to suggest that we go ahead and approve the minutes. Go ahead, Diana, one more. Go ahead. You're muted, hon. Diana, you're muted. Okay.
Sorry. Yes, we can go ahead and approve the minutes. I made that motion. Delcina already seconded, so I guess we can go on with that vote. But I just wanted to say, if the agenda is going to be based on what the PDC and the TPO are currently discussing, I make that motion that we go back to the one I had made many times, that we meet monthly and not, every other month or whatever it is.
Okay, well, we already have a motion on the table about the minutes.
Yes,
so I would suggest that we address the agendas and setting the agendas at our next meeting, perhaps, with additional information from everybody and additional information about what is happening on the PDC and TPO and where we might best serve them. So with that in mind, can we approve the minutes? Everybody in favor of approving the minutes as they are?
Aye.
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 Any objections? Okay, the minutes have been approved, and we will pursue the agenda issue and include that in our next agenda so that we can deal with the concerns. Yeah, Kendall?
I do, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Mears, I just want to say to you that I respect, we respect your commitment, and this goes for all of you, but you're one of our newest members, your commitment and your time. We know that all of you take this seriously. We don't want the CAC to be a glee club. We've been building the CAC for 10 years, and we've done some very serious work. And granted, since the expansion to the PDC, there have been growing pains. We're figuring everything out. At first, I just want to say historically that when the CAC first started, the things that were presented from the TPO side kind of were like that too, because we had so much to put in front of you. It took a while before it kind of leveled out. I'm going to ask each one of you to stick with me and don't leave. We'll work this out. I understand exactly what you're seeing and why I get it. I see it from your perspective too. Just know that we're doing our best and that this is important and that we encourage you to always bring these things up, and we will work with you to address it because your lens is critical and we don't want to lose you at all. We don't take you lightly, and we're not trying to be
I understand.
I know, and we're not trying to be frivolous, but I understand. I hear you.
Okay.
So thank you for saying something.
Okay. Yeah, Mark? Unmute.
Doing it. Thank you. I would recommend that prior to a scheduled meeting, let's say 2 weeks before, there should be a solicitation for
Absolutely.
agenda items.
That's fine. I think that's something that is, there are occasionally those things that do come up that people ask for, and the staff does try to meet those needs. But I think we need perhaps a more standardized program for dealing with that, a better way of doing it that everybody can work with. So that is certainly something for us to consider as we move forward and try to figure out our best way ahead. So thank you. We now are going to do a review of the bylaws and Robert's Rules of Orders, only Robert's Rules first. I was looking at past meetings, as I said in my email, and there is a difference between a Zoom meeting and an in-person meeting, but there are also basic rules that we really need to function by. And it became pretty obvious in the last couple of meetings, especially that we probably could all use a little refresher course in Robert's Rules, and Robert's Rules are kind of new to some people too. So there are those of us who've been working with them for 30 years, and there are those of us who just have been working with them for 30 days. So Carlton and I spoke with Kendall and Bob, and they very kindly offered to do a refresher course for us. So with that said, before you start, Bob, I think you're starting. Do you want to be interrupted while, with questions and comments while you're doing this, or do you want to wait till the end?
I don't mind discussion as we go. If I
Okay.
could recommend, Madam Chair, and I beg your forgiveness on this, but I do think it's important to do a roll call so we make certain we have a quorum of CAC members, and then I know we have a 1 or 2 call-ins so that everybody knows who is on the line. Could I suggest that Kendall do that roll call of CAC members, please?
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, Susan Archer. Jim Bowie.
Present.
Nina Britton. Brandon Carter. Lamont Curtis. Terry Danaher.
I'm here.
Mark Gadilja
Hello.
Kuchowski.
Present.
Did someone just speak?
Yes, ma'am. Excuse me, Kendall. This is Brandon. I'm not sure if you caught me. I'm
Hi.
doubled up. I was having some issues with the audio on my computer, so I'm the 555331723 number as well as my video as well.
Welcome, Brandon. Thank you so much. Carlton Hardy.
Present.
Gary Harris. Diana Howard.
You're muted.
Diana Howard. Oh, she's muted. Diana, can you unmute and declare yourself present?
I'm having trouble trying to find out where to unmute. I tried it at the bottom of the screen and it didn't work. I had to go up to my picture, but I'm here.
Diana, I have found on my system that if I hit the space bar, which is real quick and convenient, that unmutes you. And when you release the space bar, it remutes you. So you can just push it down, talk, and then let it go.
Didn't work.
It doesn't work?
Okay.
Hold on. Space bar.
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Space bar. Can you still hear me?
I can still hear you.
It's not working that way.
Diana, you have to be in mute, and from the mute position is where you would hit the space bar. If you are not in mute, you will not see any difference. So from a muted
Try it.
position, then you do it. But may I continue with attendance?
Okay, I have to hold it down. If I let my finger go, I got it. Gotcha.
John
Glad to know that.
Kish.
Thank you.
John Kish.
Here.
Lamont Curtis. Curtis Lamont, excuse me. Jay Leach. Scott McFarland. George Mears.
I'm here.
Delcina Miles.
Here.
Christian Strange.
Here.
Mark Perot. Cynthia Taylor.
Here.
Waverly Woods. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Kendall,
Brad
the
Martin
one,
is here. I must be on the special part of your list that you didn't
Oh.
call out.
Brad, hi, I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right there. Sorry. Hi, Brad. Thank
Kendall,
you.
I
Brad.
believe that Brandon indicated he was present too. I don't know if you're able to hear that or not.
Yeah, we talked. Yep, got everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay.
So, Madam Chair, if I may, I'm going to go ahead and share a screen and walk through a little bit of an overview of Robert's Rules of Order and how that applies to our Community Advisory Committee. So with your permission, I'll go ahead and proceed with that.
Please.
Okay, so if
Go right
technology doesn't fail me, hopefully there's a PowerPoint up on your screen. Can people confirm that that come through okay?
Yes.
Very good.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mears. Very good. So we spoke with the chair, and this is something that I do quite frequently with obviously various committees and commissions and boards and work groups that we chair. And every once in a while, we're asked to provide a little bit of a 101 high-level overview of Robert's Rules. And some of this will be things that you're really well aware of. I always find it's interesting and helpful to do a brief revisit. Think of Robert's Rules of Order, if you will. It's really based on parliamentary law, right? It provides the rules and the proceedings of how we're going to govern the proceedings of deliberative assemblies and other organizations, right? So sort of the rules of order, if you will. Before we go any further, though, if I could ask just a second, I'm going to geek out just a second here, because this is one time I said Robert's Rules of Order. Where did that come from? You know, and I got to be honest. I went into this and I said it had to be a planner that thought Robert's Rules up, and then I said, okay, it had to be a public administrator. Mr. Mears, I see you smiling. It was a civil engineer, sir. And what was interesting about that was there was a gentleman named Henry Martin Robert. And back in 1876, he was a civil engineer who was given an assignment where he was assigned to go to a meeting, and went to the meeting and said, oh my goodness, we're never going to get anything done if everybody's speaking all at the same time. And actually sat down and penned the first Robert's Rules of Order that was published in 1876. He was a civil engineer, and was a general with the United States Army in 1901. I just pull this up as a light moment, but to say that amazingly, Robert's Rules has been around for over 140 years. And that was the first version back in 1876, and Robert's Rules has lived through the century and continues to be amended and updated. So just wanted to provide a little bit of a light note to introduce. So let's talk a little bit about our Community Advisory Committee first, right? So as you've just discussed, you've expanded your duties to advise both the HRPDC and HRTPO. With an assignment to provide the community's viewpoint on important regional issues. You serve as a strong advocate for our region. Many of you talk about listening to your neighbors, listening to community groups, and bringing their voices forward to be heard by regional leadership and decision makers. So a really important role that our CAC plays for us. And I think that the hallmark of and the strength of the CAC over the decade that Kendall's been working with you is it's always been a place for all viewpoints to be heard, discussed, and considered in a respectful and organized manner, right? It's that diversity of input, opinions, and perspective that really allows you to have the type of critical conversations that are needed to provide input to our community and to our elected leaders. Now, in terms of parliamentary procedures, you have bylaws. The CAC has bylaws, and your bylaws indicate that Robert's Rules of Order will be used to conduct your meetings, which leads us to today's overview. So as you think of Robert's Rules of Order, the first thing that I think we sometimes lose sight of, and I'm speaking to myself a little bit. I've all sat on committees that Robert's Rules is used, and we always think, well, Robert's Rules constrains or limits me. But the first thing to really remember is it protects your rights as a member, okay? As a member of the CAC, you have the right for the majority of the CAC to decide. So if you're taking a vote, Robert's Rules protects the majority of any assembly to decide or make policy or decisions. It protects the right of all viewpoints to be heard and considered, and it protects the rights of the individual member. And you have some rights as CAC members. Number one, you have a right to attend all meetings, right? We can't call you up and say, sit this one out, right? You're a CAC member, you have a right to attend all meetings. You also, as a CAC member, have a right to make motions, which are formal proposals that require action of the group. You have the right to participate in respectful debate and express your viewpoints. You have the right to vote, and you have a right to call for a point of order, as was done earlier in today's meeting, when you think that perhaps there's a process that needs to be considered. So Robert's Rules protects your rights as individual members. Now, before we dive deeper into Robert's Rules, let's talk about our CAC and our officers. You have two officers that are appointed to lead the CAC. One of them is your chair, of course, Ms. Terry Danaher serves as our chair at the moment. And the second is your vice chair, Mr. Carlton Hardy, is our vice chair of the CAC at this moment. And while we tried really hard to sign Ms. Danaher up for another 10 years, I think the time will probably come where she tells us, Bob and Kendall, I've had my share of time. And but all kidding aside, there will come a time where we'll need to think about next chapter of chair and vice chair. So just wanted to give this as a little bit of a kickstart for that. So the CAC chair. The chair of your community advisory committee is actually appointed by the chairs of the PDC and the TPO, right? So right now our PDC chair is Norfolk City Council member Andrew McClellan. Right now our TPO chair is Hampton Mayor Donnie Tuck. The chairs then are appointed by our PDC and TPO chairs for the CAC to serve for a 3-year term. And as chair of the CAC, Ms. Danaher has the customary duties pertaining to the chair position, which include managing meetings, signing CAC documents that you approve, and performing further duties that might be assigned by the PDC or TPO. Let me give you a prime example. When the HRTPO decided to join or form the Elizabeth River Crossing or ERC task force, they asked Ms. Danaher to represent the CAC on that task force. So, you know, there can be other duties that come from those chairs at the PDC, the TPO, that they'll request of our Community Advisory Committee chair. Now, the chairman's role is first to maintain order in our meetings, to enforce Robert's Rules of Order, which I'm going to go through in a little more detail, to make certain we're operating in an expedient and impartial manner, to conduct business in a calm and objective manner, and to focus the group and not allow irrelevant discussion, right? So if you're having a great conversation about broadband and I start talking about my Pittsburgh Steelers, right, the chair can gavel me out of order, right? So Bob, you know, get back on the point. So, you know, many times as we get into conversation, it's important to have that quarterback to lead us through those discussions. You know, these are just some things for a chairperson, you know, being calm, being objective, being fair, being impartial, of course, are all very, very important traits. Ms. Danaher, you do this miraculously, and we really compliment you of having all these characteristics and bringing this approach to your responsibility as chairperson. On to our CAC vice chair. The vice chair, of course, must be a CAC member according to our bylaws, and in the absence of the chair, performs the duties of the chairperson. So if Ms. Danaher would not be able to make today's meeting, Mr. Hardy would step in and assume those responsibilities. The vice chair reports to the CAC chair. So if Ms. Danaher wanted to provide an assignment to Mr. Hardy as vice chair, they would be able to have that conversation. Now, here's the difference. Your vice chair is elected by CAC members. The chair is appointed by the chair of the PDC and TPO. The vice chair, you all as CAC members appoint via vote, okay? It's elected by this chair, this group of Community Advisory Committee members. All right, so let's delve a little bit into CAC meetings and Robert's Rules of Order. So during the meeting, these are just some basic 101s to make certain that we're complying with Robert's Rules. And we'll go into this in a little more detail. But it starts with, and something that you all do is, first you got to approve the agenda, and then you have to follow the agenda, right? The agenda is your playbook or script for the topics you're going to discuss at a given meeting. You have the ability, you'll receive that ahead of time from Kendall, that she develops based on input of the chair and vice chair. But at all times, you have the ability at the start of the meeting to propose that something be added to the agenda. Likewise, you always have the ability to propose something be removed from the agenda. Again, those are your rights to bring forward as members of the CAC. Also, the first thing you always need to do is confirm that you have a quorum present. A majority must be present to conduct business. You can have informal discussion if you don't have a quorum, but you can take no action unless you can confirm you have a quorum. So, for instance, even approval of the minutes, right? Any action requires a quorum, and it's very important to confirm you have a quorum before you get started. It's also important during our meetings to adhere to parliamentary procedure. And this first one is a must, right? Members must be recognized by the chair before they speak. That includes staff, that includes CAC members, that includes guests. The appropriate way to do that, of course, if we were all together, would be to raise our hand. The chair is working with us on the best signal, but always make certain that we're recognized by the chair before speaking. The second one is basic, but really important. One question at a time, one speaker at a time. You all have something really important to say. We don't want to lose your comments and perspective because you have a couple, you've all been to meetings where you have a couple conversations going on at the same time, and it's not very productive. Number three, yes.
Did we always do Robert rules, or we were just being polite and raising our hands because we didn't do a quorum today? We didn't make sure we had a quorum. We did a roll call vote, but did we say we had a quorum?
Yeah, we technically should have made certain we had a quorum. And Ms. Howard, I was trying to get in and while being respectful, but you're exactly right. You know, technically, before we would have done anything today, Ms. Howard, you're exactly right. We need to confirm that we have a majority of members in place.
Bob, we do have a majority of members in play. Thank you, Diane.
Yeah, thank you, Kendall.
Yes, sir.
But a good question, Ms. Howard, and it's those details that if you were making a recommendation today on something like the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which you've discussed, something like our fiber ring project that you've discussed, something like the Elizabeth River crossing tunnel issue that you've discussed, you always want to make certain those I's are dotted and T's are crossed. So Ms. Howard, just an excellent point. The other one, and again, some of these are just part of our presentation. This happens here, but we always got to respect each other and our guests, right? We're very, we're all here because we're passionate and we care about this community. And with that, we're going to have passionate conversations. Always important to have those conversations while respecting one another and our guests. And, you know, the vote on any items that are brought up before our assembly, which in this case is our community advisory committee. But the one rule that I've heard many people talk about is I've watched at the General Assembly and other places. And if you go to the General Assembly, you'll see this at committee members, at the Senate meeting, at the House, always speak through the chair. To ensure orderly meetings, members must first be recognized by the chair to provide input. Madam Chair, if I may, Madam Chair, may I have the floor? And even if at the General Assembly, it's carried through even further. Ms. Howard, you just asked me a question. At the General Assembly, there would be an extra rule where I would actually go, Madam Chair, may I please respond to Ms. Howard, right? And well, that's not required to go that far. That's up to the chair. I've seen people operate meetings to that degree of carefulness.
Robert, I need to interrupt at this point for just a second. I couldn't see, and this is part of the problem with the Zoom, when the screen is being shared, especially, there's no way of knowing. I have no signal. This may be resolved by co-hosting the meeting. Yes. With Kendall, but at the moment, whoever is presenting is going to have to do that. You're recognized because I can't tell.
Yes, and Madam Chair, I will. You're exactly right, and I will cover that for you.
Thank you.
So we can do that. Absolutely. Okay, now there will be times, of course, where you will want to make motions. You're going to want proposals to be considered by this body. So that this body can take action and provide recommendations onto the PDC or the TPO board for consideration. I'll talk about that a little more, but that typically starts with, if I have an idea, I would, Madam Chair, I have a motion that I'd like to be considered by the Community Advisory Committee. And when recognized, yes, Bob, please proceed. I move that and I state the motion, right? I'll go through that protocol from there as the chair will ask for that second. And then after a second, the motion can either be voted on or it can be discussed. Now, as you can imagine, if Robert Rules did not provide an option for the first motion to be modified and revised, we'd never get anywhere, right? Robert's Rules is set up to encourage conversation. So let's say I made a motion to do A, B, and C, which was seconded by Kendall if we were CAC members, but we're not. And then the chair called for conversation and somebody brought up A, B, well, we want A, B, C, and D, right? There's opportunities for secondary motions that allow Kendall and I to think about changing our first motion to reflect the input, right? So it's not that when a motion is made and seconded that the conversation stops. Many times it just begins, and there is a process to go through that. So let's walk through real quick. I apologize for some of these basics, and I'm going to be very, very quick. But you know, the important steps outlined in Robert's Rules for making a motion. So first off, the member raises their hand. You know, staff directs it under this environment to the chair that we have somebody that wants recognized. The chair recognizes that member by either a nod or stating his or her name. The member states his or her motion. I move to, and presents the motion. Another member, the chair typically would say, is there a second to that motion? Another member of the CAC will indicate there is by calling out a second. In these electronic meeting environments, it's important that you state your name for both the motion and the second. The chair typically always restates the motion and places it before the assembly. It has been moved and seconded that A, B, C, and D, right? Is there any discussion? And at that point, members, again, have to be recognized by the chair, but can express if they like the motion, if they don't like the motion, if they have any revisions to the motion, okay? And many times what we call subsidiary motions or revisions to the motion are offered up at that point. After all of that debate, right? And Madam Chair, this is the art of being the chair, as you know all too well, right? When is the debate come forward? Do you have a consensus? Many times what will happen is people will offer revisions to the original motion and the original movers and seconders will agree to those changes, right? But when all that debate is over, the chair typically puts a question to a vote. Are you ready for the question? Okay, that typically happens in one or two ways. Either the chair says, I think it's time for the question, but all of you as CAC members have the ability to call the question and ask the chair to call the question. If you know, and I've seen that happen from time to time. So after the chair asks, are you ready for the question? The question is on the adoption of the motion. Those are in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Those opposed, please indicate by saying no. Under these electronic meetings, what we would do, Madam Chair, is you would call on staff. We would call the members' names, and each member by roll call would vote yes or no. That's now required by state law.
Mr. Crump.
Amendment that allows us to meet remotely requires us to do verbal roll call votes of all votes that occur.
Mr. Crump.
Yes, sir.
On that last slide, if the question has been called and people just really aren't done discussing it, how is that addressed?
The chair has the latitude to say that for the conduct of business and to reach the best conclusion, it would be up to the chair to decide if enough conversations happen to call the question. So there's a little bit of latitude there. Typically what I've always seen with chairs is if there is not, if the conversation still, typically what Robert's Rules would suggest is as long as new arguments or information are being brought up, you would let the conversation continue. But if I made my argument twice, I'm about to do it a third time, I would expect the chair to say to me, Mr. Crum, we've heard that, we respect that, and we'll take that into consideration, right? So you tend not to let it go redundantly, but that does allow the chair to determine that. So Madam Chair, I hope that answers that question. Okay.
Madam Chair,
Madam Chair, Mr. Godoldi Yutrowski has.
Yeah.
has
Go ahead.
Yes, I would raise this point. There is provision within Robert's rules for the body to come to a decision about terminating debate. It requires a 2/3 vote of those assembled, and it's called calling the previous question. I don't know if that will be covered.
Yeah,
subsequently.
That is something I understand, and I think that in order to respect the agenda, we have time frames because we only have so much time on any of our meetings. That part of our remit as a committee is to try to get our business done within a time frame that meets the needs of our members, guests, anybody involved, and trying to stick to the agenda as much as possible. And we've gone over agenda in the past, we've gone over time and all that sort of thing, but I think that there really is, it's a question of trying to hear as many people as possible. And we can add rules, as far as I know, to our bylines ultimately, or at the beginning of a meeting saying, everybody has a chance to speak once and then you have a chance to speak again. That kind of thing, where you can vote by 2/3 saying these are the rules for the meeting. Is that not true?
It is. I want to thank Mr. Godoldi Yutrowski. My response to the question was, in this particular case, giving the chair the ability to decide, let's say the chair would say, no, I want to keep the conversation going. Let's say we're talking 10 years from now, so it doesn't involve the current chair. Mr. Godoldi Yutrowski, again, back to Robert's rules, protecting your rights as members and the ability for the majority to decide. You're exactly right. If you're not, the first advice is always to ask the chair to call the question. If the chair would refuse, you would have the ability to make a motion that then a second that requires 2/3 vote to call the question. And thank you, sir, for raising that. So that would be a scenario then if the chair said, no, I'm going to keep the conversation going, and we've been here 5 hours, and you say, okay, it's time. You have that ability. So, okay. So typically then your chair always announces the results of the vote. Those in favor have it. The motion has been approved by 14-2, or those opposed have it. The motion lost 16-5, whatever that vote might be. And then you move on to the next order of business. Now, another point that's made in most Robert's Rules of Order training, and I don't consider this training, I consider this a discussion, because I believe there's people on here much more adept at this than I'm able to be, but we always talk about examples when a meeting is out of order. And I've not seen this, but it's just something to be aware of, right? And again, Robert's Rules protects your rights as members. You have a right to not have a meeting get out of order, right? And you have a right to call a point of order. But what's an example that somebody's that a meeting's out of order? Well, first off, and it goes back to members speaking without being recognized by the chair. That is a violation of Robert's Rules. You must be recognized by the chair. Some of the other ones, individual members making, and again, not things that happen here, but just good reminders. Individual members making personal remarks or attacks, that's not appropriate, right? That we debate the issue, we don't debate the person. Members bringing up the same motion over and over again, or essentially one like it, right? Just because I changed the word and the doesn't mean I changed the motion, right? When debates are not directed to motions, but to motives, principles, and personalities. And again, when members yelling out in opposition. And again, you haven't seen this, you're not going to see that, but it's just a good reminder. It's just a good reminder of Robert's Rules and the proper conduct of a meeting environment. Now, the other question comes up always is, okay, but what happens if a member does one of those things? And again, Robert's Rules offers provisions there. If I were a CAC member and you felt that I was doing one of these things, you have a couple of options. Number one is to censure me. Censuring is an expression of strong disapproval or harsh criticism, and it can be adopted without a formal disciplinary procedure. What that means is there's a provision in Robert's Rules that if you have a problem member, you can take it to a hearing, and the CAC can hold a hearing. If you want to censure someone, if you wanted to censure me as a CAC member, you can do that without that disciplinary process. You can say, Bob, Delcino can make a motion that Bob's wearing bad ties to meetings since she picked on me for my tie. I'll use that one. And you could say, Bob, you're wearing bad ties to the meeting, and we're going to censure you for that, right? And you could make a motion, a second, and vote. And then the chair and vice chair would no doubt put that in writing and send it to me and explain what behavior I'm doing that the group is not comfortable with. So that would be censuring. Now, there's more stringent things that could be done. If I'm censured and I still keep doing that, you could suspend me. You could suspend some of my rights or all my rights of membership for a period of time. You might tell me to sit out a meeting or two and think over whether I want to be part of the group. That's within your ability to do. Removal is obviously much more serious and would involve bringing in the organization attorney, would involve what they call a trial or a hearing where, you would present your case, the member causing the trouble would present theirs or alleged to be causing the trouble. And you would need to have removal proceedings placed in your bylaws. And that's something that if you would ever want that as protection, you need to have that included in your bylaws to be able to proceed with removal proceedings, okay? Now, here's another one that always comes up. What if I have a conflict of interest? And I'd like to pause and step back on this a second, because if you stop and think of it, all of us have lives, personal lives and professional lives. And everybody is either earning a living or has earned a living. Everyone has had a trade. Everybody has friends. Everybody has family members. If you required everyone who was elected to office and to be appointed to committees, advisory groups, the community advisory committees, the boards, commissions, if you required them to not have any conflicts, you wouldn't have very many people on boards or commissions or be elected officials, right? But Robert's Rules gives you protection there as well. It gives you two abilities to step back when you have, and you have, a real or perceived conflict of interest. The first is something called an abstention. An abstention is when you withhold your vote on an item due to a real or perceived conflict, okay? And when the roll call vote would come, if I felt I had a conflict of interest, I would say, Madam Chair, I abstain from my vote. And it would be marked as such in the minutes, right? The second is a recusal, or to recuse yourself. Now, when you recuse yourself, you are removing yourself from both the deliberation and discussion of the item as well as the vote. So let's talk about that a second. Abstention, I can participate in the conversation. Madam Chair, I may ask to be recognized. I can provide input. I can try to persuade you, right? But at the end, I feel that after listening to all the conversation, I'm going to abstain. I'm not going to be a voting member. If I come in the meeting, though, and I feel that the item is an absolute conflict, and I've seen elected officials do this, I can announce right away, Madam Chair, I am going to recuse myself from both this conversation and the debate. And members push back to the table, but they don't participate at all in the conversation or the vote. So Robert's Rules gives you two approaches if you feel you have a conflict that is an absolute conflict or a conflict that may be perceived. So just wanted to give you that heads up on the question that always comes up in terms of conflict of interest. So just to wrap up, most importantly though, I just want to thank everybody for all you do to advocate for and represent our regional community. I mean, this is this CAC, I think, has just been a superstar in terms of providing that place for these important community discussions to occur. I think you've done a magnificent job of following the procedures. We always can improve, and Madam Chair, I just thank you for the opportunity to introduce some of these things today for conversation. Madam Chair, I'm going to turn it over to you before Kendall moves on to our bylaws to see if there's any questions or conversation.
Okay, Mark seems to have a question. Go ahead.
Yes, I have a request. I looked back to the website and checked the files to make sure I didn't miss them. Could we get the slides posted there for download and future quick reference?
Mm-hmm.
Just the item page was posted rather than the slides, but this is a nice, compact overview of some of the essential procedures. And sometimes in the heat of the moment, we forget some of the things that we knew. And this is a nice way to refresh our memories, especially for those of us of a certain age.
Mr. Godoldo-Yatrowski, Madam Chair, if I may, we would be happy to do that. And Madam Chair, I also want to say, I apologize. I was zeroed in on the talk and just had a chance to check the chat. And Ms. Howard, I want to apologize if I was coming in and out a little bit. I'm going to move up a little closer to the microphone there. Madam Chair, I believe that Ms. Howard was trying to be recognized before I spoke.
Yes, she was, and she's next, and then George had a question or comment. Diana?
Okay, am I on?
You're on.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question about the abstention, and I forget what the other one is because that screen is up. Yeah. When you do one of those things, do you have to say why you are doing that? What your conflict of interest is?
Yes, Madam Chair, Ms. Howard, if I may, yes, technically, what I see most times when somebody abstains or recuses himself is that they do make that announcement. So for instance, I was at a meeting once where we were discussing a project of Dominion Enterprises, and an elected official announced that they had stock purchases in Dominion, and for that reason they were recusing themselves, right? I've seen other elected officials in other places that I've worked, not in Hampton Roads, indicate that an item came forward on a development plan and they had a relative working for a company, okay, and they were recusing themselves. So typically in the spirit of transparency, you do announce the reason for, you don't have to get into excruciating detail, but you announce the reason for the conflict and the to abstain or to recuse yourself. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, are there any other questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Cynthia.
One area that always kind of confuses me is you have an original motion, it's up for discussion. Many times there'll be maybe an amendment to the original motion. But I think what happens sometimes is someone will make a second motion, an alternate motion. Typically, it's my understanding if we have two motions like that, we vote on the second motion first and then go back to the original motion.
Typically, if I may, Madam Chair,
please.
Typically what I always advise the chairs that I work with, and Ms. Taylor, what an excellent question, because it does become quite difficult. I always advise my chairs one question at a time, one motion at a time.
Okay.
So let's play that out a second, Ms. Taylor. And, you know, there's going to be attorneys better qualified than I on this. But typically, if I were to make a motion and it was seconded, and somebody tried to get me, say, I'd like to propose a friendly amendment. And I just said, well, that's not too friendly. No, I'm not going to change my motion. Typically, someone would many times make another motion in a second. What I've seen a lot of chairs do is call the vote on the first motion to see if it's defeated. Because you got that first motion on the floor, you got to deal with it before you vote on another one. So that first motion typically is either withdrawn by me as the original mover, or I agree to amend it, or the question's called. Then it gets defeated, then you move on to that new fresh motion. It's typically how I've seen that play out. I want to stress, though, I am not an attorney, ma'am. But that's typically how I see many of my chairs deal with that issue. But it's a great, great question.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cynthia. Anybody else? I can't see everybody, so pipe up if you're there. Okay, well, we seem to have finished up with you, Bob. Thank you very much. That was very helpful. Great refresher for me. I'm reminded of some things that I would not have thought about necessarily. Kendall is now going to talk to us about the bylaws, and we are a little bit past our time frame, but and we could handle our bylaws, changes to the bylaws. In fact, we will be looking at our bylaws because we formed them a year or so ago when we took on the new PDC duties, with the understanding that we would revisit them after we dealt with them for a while, because we changed them to the best of our ability. So Kendall's going to give a presentation about what the bylaws currently are. And if you have, again, Kendall, I'm going to ask you, do you want to be interrupted as you're speaking or at the end, and keeping in mind that I can't necessarily see everybody, so you may have a better vantage point than I do in terms of people asking questions. And then if, as we go through, if there are suggestions, I would suggest that we put those into the next agenda or that they be handled by staff and then brought to us at the next meeting. Do people understand what I'm saying here? Yeah, because there are bound to be some questions and comments here, and I don't want to lose anything, but I don't want to lose people either as they walk away from the table because it's 2 o'clock. So we'll keep it going as much as we can with the understanding that these things will be dealt with for sure, especially since the agenda items came up earlier today. Okay, Kendall?
Madam Chair, let me say that actually the way that I organized this presentation is just to highlight the different subject areas, different areas covered in the bylaws, just so that people can know what's covered. And I was going to let everyone know, as you did, thank you, that we are going to be taking a look at updating them so that people can have this, and that I've just broken it down. There are no, I'm not, you'll see, I'm not mentioning any potential changes. It's just, this is what's in our bylaws. This is what's covered. Very 30,000 feet. It's for you. Over the next couple of months, we'll be looking at the bylaws and we'll come back, but we want you to know every section. This is going to be easy. With regards to being interrupted, I cannot do the presentation and read these questions here. Therefore, I would ask that we wait until the end. My presentation is 5 hot minutes, so I have an eye on the clock as well, okay?
Okay, great, thank you. So if everybody will hold comments and questions until she's finished, thank you.
Yes, and one other thing, with that said, to everyone, I actually put a note in general chat. I'm offering a Zoom training session. I've offered it before. I'm happy to do it again to teach you how to raise your hand and do all those things. Please take a look at that and let me know if you want to do that. And Terry, I'm getting ready to share my screen, okay?
Okay.
All right. Okay. Can you tell me if you see that? Okay, you got, what's going on?
Yep, it's not full screen.
Can you see that it's not? Okay, hold on a second.
It's full.
Is it full screen? You good?
Yeah, on mine.
Can everyone see this?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Okay. So today we're going to talk about the bylaws. I thought that I would just kind of take you to the beginning of how bylaws are perceived in terms of what they are. I know you all know this, but let me just say that really the greatest thing about bylaws is that they really give you a confine and a construct to act as a group, in our case, a group, a committee, and kind of outlines meeting times, how often, responsibilities, how meetings should be conducted, etc. So really it's a great go-to, and it's never changing unless it's formally changed. So it's a good thing to always have, to refer to. So right now, let me just tell you that our bylaws are broken up into the following articles that cover membership, the terms, voting, meetings, officers and duties, subcommittees, staff, procedures, and subsequent amendments. I would encourage each of you to go back and take a look at each section, because we are going to be having another, at our next CAC meeting, we are going to have a couple of proposed changes to the bylaws for you to vote on. So real quickly, let me tell you, for example, under the membership Article 3 section of the CAC bylaws, it talks about how many members we have in total, that it's Hampton Roads localities, talks about terms of service and what happens if you fail to attend CAC meetings, how long your terms last. The next Article 4 is voting. It talks about how voting shall be done. And it also provides a process for reconsideration of CAC votes, which I highly, particularly since Bob gave his presentation on Robert's Rules of Order, I highly recommend that you look at that particular article with regards to reconsideration of CAC votes. That's just in case you want to look at it again and just what the procedure is, how to do that. With regards to meetings, and this is something that we're going to be looking at based on feedback from CAC members over the last year and a half, we're looking at, in this section, where meetings occur, how often they occur, you know, how to convene special meetings, who can do that, what our obligations are under public input and public comment and public notice. So that is what the meeting section covers. Officers and duties is very simple. That just talks about the chair, the vice chair, how they serve, the length of time, how they're appointed or nominated or elected by the group. And so we're going to be taking a look at that section as well. And then the subcommittees. And I wanted to really talk about this because we often edge on the idea of starting a subcommittee for one purpose or another, and we have yet to do that, but it's definitely an option. We talk about it so much, so I would encourage you guys to look at that article as well. With regards to staff, this is really about, in this case, Bob and I, Bob as the executive director and I as a civil rights administrator are your team, as is the whole staff, but Bob and I are the official staff of the CAC. How we are to support you and provide anything for you that we can, that you may need to facilitate the meeting. As Bob talked about under Robert's Rules of Order, we also cover that under the CAC bylaws under procedures. We talk about Robert's Rules of Order. We also talk about the fact that the CAC is an advisory agency in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and then therefore held to FOIA, the Conflict of Interest Act, the Public Procurement Act, and other acts that are clearly listed in the bylaws as well. And so, as I said, we're going to be coming back to you in March of 2021 of this year to kind of talk about some changes that we've heard need to be made, that we feel might need to be made just to be tweaked a little bit. So as I said, this is a very, very short presentation just to break down the bylaws for you. I'm happy to forward the bylaws to you after this meeting so that you can begin to look at them and make notes and let us know in March if there's anything that you feel needs to be addressed in the bylaws as they currently stand. and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Okay, could you get rid of the,
Yeah, I'm on my way to get rid of that.
yeah, thank you.
You're so welcome. I'm having issues. Okay, do you still?
It's still up.
Yeah, hold on. There you go. Okay.
There we are. Hello.
All right, Dan. All right, thank you.
Okay, does anybody have any questions or comments for Kendall? Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I'm interested in knowing, I don't have my copy of the bylaws readily at hand. Do we maintain a version control so that there is a sequence number and a date in terms of bylaws so that we can all be on the same set when we're
Yes,
having a discussion?
yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Diana? You're muted.
Space bar, easier way to do it. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I know I asked you this privately when I said before, can I make that motion again that we meet monthly instead of 6 times a year? Do I have to make that again?
That is something that comes up. I mean, it recurs pretty much every meeting. Kendall,
Yeah.
Kendall, do you want to start? And then Mark?
Point of order.
Well,
Yes,
okay.
Go ahead.
Point of order. Is that for inclusion in the bylaws, or is that a motion now?
That's a bylaws question. Our meetings are set up in our bylaws.
No, I mean what Diana is saying. Is she wanting to put that into immediate effect, or is she talking about consideration for the bylaws?
Diana?
Okay, can I make a motion that we put that into the bylaws, that we meet every month instead of the way we are, 6 times a year now? If we're supposed to be giving our recommendations to the PDC and the TPO that meet monthly, I think we should meet monthly as well. So I make a motion, we put that in the bylaws.
Does anyone we can't change the bylaws just by adding to it right now. Even if we make a motion, it would have to be a formal process that gets approved ultimately by the TPO and PDC. The other thing here is that we are talking about dealing with the bylaws over the next 2 meetings so that we can do the formal change. So yeah, go ahead, Diana. Unmute, yeah. Good.
Okay, I made the motion before and it was counted by, that's when we were meeting quarterly, and it got put down to 6 times a month. So I don't see why we can't do that. Am I wrong?
We were discussing bylaws at that time, I do believe. In the context of the bylaws, we chose. Staff has other, Bob?
So if I may,
Yes.
and Madam Chair, I'm going to go back to Robert's rules, and there is a procedure for Ms. Howard to bring this forward. If I may have the floor, I do want to read that out of our bylaws.
Okay.
Okay, so I want to make certain I'm audible.
Yeah.
Any CAC member may propose amendments to the bylaws by placing such proposed amendments in writing before the CAC at a CAC meeting. Okay. No vote shall be taken on the proposed amendments until the meeting that follows the meeting at which the written amendments were provided to the CAC. The public shall also be provided access to inspect the proposed amendments. Approval of the amendments require 2/3 of the vote of this body, as well as approval by both the PDC and TPO boards. So let me, having gone through that, let me try to put that in plain English. So Ms. Howard, you would have the ability to take what you just articulated, place that in writing, and submit that You could provide it to Kendall to send out to the agenda next month, as well as anybody else with any proposed bylaws amendment. It wouldn't be able to be voted on next month because you'd want to give the CAC time to review it and the public time to comment, but it could be voted on at the next meeting after that. If 2/3 of this group approves it, then it would go on for consideration for approval. It would need approval by both the TPO and PDC board. So, Madam Chair, thank you. I just wanted to voice that out of the bylaws, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I do want to point out that the PDC and TPO meet, I believe, 10 times a year, not 12.
Not 12.
So that's something you might want to consider in anybody. And okay, are there any other questions or comments? Yeah, George.
I would probably just more of a question. The 10 times might make more sense, but we're also, I'm asking that we look at the scope of our work, and if it's, expanded so much, that should dictate more meetings, whether it's 10 or not, that's up for discussion. But right now we're too watered down to focus on the important issues in my opinion. But that's just a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, did you raise your hand? Okay. Carlton, did you have something you wanted? Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Kendall.
Madam Chair, very quickly, Mark, I just want to tell you that the last bylaws were updated and I want to apologize to all of you. I neglected to say the last bylaws were updated in March of 2020, and we have a chronological list of every bylaw with every change in our archival files for each of you to see as well. So you'll see the iteration of the bylaws over the years. Mark, I think that was the nature of your question. So that, yeah, you'll see that the latest one is posted. And again, I'll be happy to forward that to you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I do want to ask if people would like to take an opportunity between meetings to send in writing to Kendall so that they can be presented in writing at the next meeting. So that would solve the first, that would meet the requirements of the first bylaws activity. That if it's in writing and it's out there, then we can see it at the meeting and then it could be voted on the next time around. Would that work for people? This is as opposed to each individual writing it down and bringing a piece of paper to everybody, or in this case, linking it. It would all just go through the office instead so that it could be done in an organized manner. Does that work for everybody? Yeah, George?
Terry, just to clarify, would Kendall be taking those recommendations and sending them out to the rest of us so we'd all see it before the next meeting?
Before the next meeting, yes. It would all be in writing. You could see it and then it would be presented at the next meeting. Does that work? Does that meet Mr. Crum? Does that meet Robert's Rules requirements? Okay, I just want to make sure we're there. Okay, if that works for everybody, what we can do is also send out a message, because not everybody is here, saying we're looking at the bylaws. We've been working with them by March, for a year, and we're trying to review and update as we need to meet the needs of our committee and our boards. Okay, does that work? Okay. Well, thank you, Kendall, very much. You and Robert Crum have done a great job. We now have a presentation on the legislative agenda, and that again is Mr. Crum. So please take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to quickly share screen here and walk through some information. If you could all confirm for me that came up on the screen okay?
It's there.
Okay, fantastic. So these items will all look familiar to you. Our regional legislative agenda approved by the PDC and TPO board includes most of these items have been discussed and deliberated by the Community Advisory Committee over the past year. As you're aware, I'm sure the Virginia General Assembly session for 2021 began yesterday. This is a short session. In Virginia terms, I'll give you some exact dates, but what that means is the session began on January 13th, will conclude on February the 27th. Now, what we just found out from the last session that was extended so much is that doesn't mean it's going to end on February 27th, but those are the current plans. HRPDC and TPO adopts a regional legislative agenda, has every year for the last 4 years to try to be quite focused and strategic. I serve as the legislative representative for the PDC and the TPO. And my job is to work with the various legislative liaisons to present to the General Assembly our regional legislative priorities and to also try to advocate as best we can. I don't lobby, but we advocate on behalf of the betterment of our region. So this agenda was approved by both the PDC and the TPO boards in a unanimous manner. And we have some legislation that will be introduced, that has been introduced to address some of these items. So I'd like to go over some of that for you. First, as you can imagine, coastal resiliency, flooding, sea level rise, big issues here in Hampton Roads, combined with land subsidence, really a very, very difficult item for us. We have at the HRPDC a subcommittee that's been appointed by the HRPDC to deal with matters of flooding and coastal flooding. That committee brought to the HRPDC, and that committee consists of elected officials such as Andrew McClellan from the city of Norfolk, Barbara Henley from the city of Virginia Beach. It consists of people like Councilmember Jenkins from Newport News and Mayor Donnie Tuck from the city of Hampton and others who really have taken a pretty deep dive into this issue of coastal resiliency. With their recommendation, the PDC's adopted a set of regional legislative priorities to deal with the issue of flooding and coastal resilience. The first is requesting that the Commonwealth of Virginia form a Virginia Commonwealth Flooding Board. Now, you'll recall, and I know that you know, that in Virginia, we have something called the Commonwealth Transportation Board, or CTB. And that group meets on a regular basis. It brings together people from all across Virginia to focus directly on transportation. It also brings all the state agencies together to align their resources and discuss solutions to our transportation problems. Our elected officials believe we need something similar for flooding in Virginia. Right now, the concern is that at the state level, our efforts to address flooding are siloed at the state level. We don't have VDOT at the table, talking to the Department of Housing and Community Development, talking to the Virginia Department of Emergency Management. Our elected officials really think there needs to be that alignment among state agencies and regional partners to really spend the time and focus that's needed to address flooding issues in Virginia. They're also aware that here next to the coast, we might have flooding coming from coastal impact. You'll recall from the presentation you received in our joint land use study that one of the biggest challenges facing our military bases is that roads like Hampton Boulevard and Shore Drive flood very frequently today. And they even flood sometimes when it's not raining, what we call blue sky flooding. And that our military is having increased difficulty getting to the bases when we lose a lane to water. The concern that our folks have is that here in Hampton Roads, the flooding might be from coastal impacts. Out west, it could be from riverine impacts. And you're watching the storms just like we are. More and more of them come over New Orleans, they come up the Gulf, they come up the Mississippi, and they're hitting Blacksburg and Roanoke as they swing east. And Western Virginia is seeing flooding as well. It's just being caused by different threats. So the feeling is the formation of this Commonwealth Flooding Board will be a critical step, particularly since Virginia now will participate in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is going to give us some resources to invest in flood mitigation. So That's the first item, and I won't spend as much time as on the other ones, but I wanted to discuss on that item. Moving on, we have, oh, and by the way, Senator Linwood Lewis is offering up a bill for the creation of the Commonwealth Flooding Board. So we're very interested in seeing where that bill goes. The second item I want to mention comes out of the city of Virginia Beach and has been adopted by our region. It is asking that resiliency be considered in the state smart scale funding program. Smart scale, as you're probably aware, is the primary funding source for transportation projects in Virginia. Right now, if you're a locality and you take measures to design your transportation project to reduce flooding, the cost of your project goes up and your competitiveness under smart scale goes down. The more your project costs, the less competitive you're going to be. Our elected officials don't think that's correct. They're asking Virginia to consider a bill to incorporate resiliency in the smart scale scoring system so that projects that invest in flood mitigation are rewarded. Now, I can tell you that a couple of delegates have submitted this bill on behalf of Virginia Beach, so that's going to be a live bill that will be happening. Thirdly, our region's elected officials believe that Virginia's residential property disclosure requirements to provide disclosure about a property's vulnerability to flooding or any history of flood damage or flood insurance claims needs to be amended. I think if I may quote a couple of our elected officials, they say, if you can buy a used car and you can get a Carfax report on your car to tell whether or not the car you're about to buy was in a flood, you ought to be able to do the same thing when you're purchasing a house or a property. Right now, it's buyer beware. There is no requirement that if I'm going to buy a property and it has a history of flooding, there is no requirement that that be corresponded to me. We're working with the Virginia Association of Realtors on this issue. They understand our concerns. We believe we're going to have a bill introduced this session to address this item, and we look forward to that conversation. Finishing up on flooding, the final item that we've asked for is an update on rainfall precipitation pattern data that's used to design our storm sewer systems. Right now, the report that's utilized is called Atlas 14. It's prepared by the National Weather Service, and it is that report that is used to design our storm sewers. That report predicts our rainfall patterns. It's not been updated since 2006. And as you know, our rainfall patterns are changing. Virginia Beach has done some exceptional work with a consultant, and what they found is that Atlas 14 is 20% too low. So Virginia Beach is starting to design their storms sewers based on Atlas 14 standards plus 20%. Fortunately, since we published this legislative agenda, the state heard us, they reacted, and they found money to update the Atlas 14 report. So we're very happy about that. That report will be updated this year and give us new standards. So we're very, very pleased with that. A couple of other things on our legislative agenda. Our chair, Ms. Danaher, has been very involved with the Elizabeth River Crossing Task Force. Our region continues to want the impact of these terrible tolls on our region to be mitigated by the General Assembly. Recently, as we reported, the asset's been sold to Albertus, which is a Spanish toll company. With Manulife Life Insurance, John Hancock Life Insurance is the other purchaser. It was sold for $2.3 billion. This is a tough one. Our region is not signatory to the contract. It was signed back in 2011 between the Commonwealth of Virginia and the operator. So we've been trying to insert ourselves in this conversation for the last couple of years. There's been minor concessions in the sale to the new operator, the new owner and operator. They've agreed to place a freeze on tolls for the next year. They also agreed to continue for another decade at least the low-income assistance program for people that meet income requirements to receive financial assistance. But our region's officials want more. We want the Commonwealth to continue to look for the money and partner with us, and really believe that the only way we're going to get control of this is find the $2.3 billion to bring this under public ownership. So last month's meeting, Ms. Danaher was at, Mr. Hardy was at, all the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization, and the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission, representing the three major regional organizations in the region, all endorsed a proclamation and signed onto a proclamation asking the Commonwealth for this help. So this is an item we're going to continue to work very hard on. Another important transportation item is the I-64 gap between Hampton Roads and Richmond. I think everybody is aware that we have completed or nearing completion of 3 phases of widening the I-64 that's going to take you just west of Richmond, or excuse me, just west of Williamsburg. We're driving the first 2 phases now that gets you up to Busch Gardens. The last phase goes past the Queens Creek trestles and takes you to west of Williamsburg. From there, there's a 29-mile gap to take you to the Bottoms Bridge intersection just east of 295 near Richmond. We are working to try to encourage our state and federal legislators to please bring federal and state funding to complete this gap. We really believe that we need to connect our metropolitan area to the I-95 main line if we're going to keep Hampton Roads a competitive metropolitan region. We have some parameters around water quality in Chesapeake Bay that we're asking for. We have legislative statements around broadband and asking for increased funding around broadband, not only to support our planned regional fiber network, but also to hopefully assist with last mile service. We want to continue in this legislature to support legislation that promotes offshore wind, and just as importantly, jobs that we think we can create around the supply chain here in our harbor to support offshore wind. That can be in laydown areas, that can be in manufacturing component parts for these large wind turbines. It can be to park these incredible ships that go out in the ocean and are going to build these wind turbines. And it's even the technology to get them permitted, to maintain them and keep them operating. So we think there's jobs to be had around this area, and we want to claim those jobs here in the Hampton Roads region. I'll wrap up by saying that we've been working, Keith Kennedy's been leading our effort on economic development site readiness. We've been really pleased with the progress we've made there. Keith has reported that to this Community Advisory Committee. We've been successful in bringing Go Virginia money to get some of our sites more shovel ready for economic development. We want additional state assistance in that regard. Housing continues to be a major issue. As you can imagine, Homeland Security funding to protect our military assets in our region is critically important. K-12 public education, our region has continued to take the lead role, and we've seen substantial increases in K-12 public education funding. And then finally, we want to continue to advocate for improved passenger rail service between Norfolk and Richmond and between our peninsula localities in Richmond. We think this is key to our mobility and frankly key to reducing congestion on Interstate 64. So, Madam Chair, I apologize for my long-winded comments there, but just wanted to give you an opportunity. We mailed this out immediately after it was approved, but wanted the chance just to go over this for you. I will continue to monitor any bills that go in, and we'll keep you apprised of how these proceed. Madam Chair, I'll turn that back over to you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to take some questions here, but I did want to make clear because some of this has been wrapped up into a presentation that went to the legislation, but elements of these topics have been handled over time, and some of them over 3-4 years at some of our meetings. There have been presentations sent out by staff members and other messages sent to our committee over time. They are in some ways possibly unrecognizable because they have now been put together in part of a package. But I recognize that a lot of people have a lot of questions and that there are some areas that have not necessarily been covered in much detail. So I am going to open things up to the floor now. And Mark already had raised his hand. I heard that. And if it's possible to stop sharing the screen so I can see, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, Mark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would ask of Mr. Crum if the concession on this year's regularly docketed toll increase, if they had done that on their own, or if there was a request from somebody on the Commonwealth side, and if there was a request from the Commonwealth, did the Commonwealth have to ante up anything to get that deferment?
So our region through the ERC task force has advocated incredibly hard with the Secretary of Transportation's office. They heard us loud and clear, Mr. Godoldy-Gutrowski, that we were looking for any relief possible to our residents. I obviously am not signatory to the agreement, nor are our mayors. I can tell you that I know the Secretary of Transportation's office had a lot of conversation with the incoming buyers. I don't want to sound ungrateful. 1 year right now helps. It really, really does for residents. It really, really does. And the low income relief program is a help. But I think we are united in saying that we've got to look for more. And it's a difficult item. Many of you have much more experience in contract law than I do. They are sitting with a contract. It is signed, right? So, you know, we go into this battle without a whole lot of ammunition. So to answer your question directly, sir, I believe that this administration and Secretary of Transportation's office had some influence in getting at least these first concessions for us.
Okay.
I hope that's a fair answer.
George.
Yes, ma'am. On the coastal resilience, a Commonwealth flooding board that does not consist of qualified members may turn into more an emotional board than a realistic one. The media misinformation on this has been large. It's been weak on evaluation of the actual causes. I fully understand that I hold a minority opinion on global warming and sea level rise on this board, but any orders that anything that discusses mitigation and resiliency must consider, you know, what I consider more significant contributing factors in CO2. Coastal erosion is huge. Urban hydrology and infill, especially with infill lots, it has been a problem in every urban coastal community in the country. Failure of cities to keep their drainage channels clear. I've been on FEMA boards where that's why Newport News got flooded so bad with some of the storms. There was just no place for the water to go. Virginia Beach is suffering the same problems, as is the Whaleyville sections in Suffolk. If the water has no place to go, the flooding is going to get worse. Inadequate building codes in terms of minimum elevations to permit construction of livable space. That needs to actually consider all these issues and subsidence. I'm very positive on the fact that disclosure to property owners of where they are in the current NFIP flood map. That is huge. I've been arguing for that for decades. The real estate people don't want to get involved with it, but it's not that hard to get an NFIP section of the map, put a little X where the property is you're buying, so people don't go in blind and then surprised that they're in a flood zone, or they're not in an X zone outside of the 500-year floodplain. So anyway, I'll just leave it at that. That's a very positive, but the other issues are that, you know, cities don't want to look at them because it means changing their building codes and, you know, their building inspections, and developers don't want that because it's a little bit more expensive when you have to increase your minimum building elevation, you know, 1 foot to 1.5 foot to account for what's really going on. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Yeah, go ahead, Brad.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I, along some of the same lines as George just said, and what piqued my interest was that Bob Crum said that the city of Virginia Beach has done great work to do the 20% additional rainfall events. I agree that Virginia Beach has done great work in a lot of respects. I don't want to be framed as a climate change denier or anything like that, but some of the work, and we're seeing this in the development community, and it affects individual residential homes, and it affects big commercial projects and everything in between. Some of the stuff that Virginia Beach has done has been absolutely debilitating to the development process, and we are running into some challenges. So I don't want to just have the board believe that this is all daisies and sunshine. We're talking about living shorelines with as much waterfront property as there is in Virginia Beach and in Tidewater. Bulkheads are not good. Bulkheads bounce waves back, they create erosion, they create a lot of difficulties. But when you go to a flattened living shoreline, it eats up a lot of real estate. And in a lot of cases, you come up into the backyard of the house and sometimes all the way to the house. You have stormwater models that are not representative of anything in reality that has ever been evidenced or ever been witnessed by people who have been there 40 and 50 and 60 years. You have height separations that you need to get 3 feet or 2 feet of separation when you build your house above the FEMA flood zone or above a storm surge zone. And that's running into problems with height limitations on your homes. We're seeing that a lot at the north end of the beach and in Shadow Lawn, for those of you that are familiar with Virginia Beach. So again, the city of Virginia Beach has done great things with some studies and some other stuff. Some of the stuff they are doing is not so good. And I'd love to have more of that conversation, that there are certainly subsidence and sea level rise and things that we could be addressing. But some of the tactics and some of the procedures and some of the programs are pretty problematic. Thank you for the opportunity to say that.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have a comment or a question? Diana? You're muted. Unmute. You need to unmute. You're still muted. There
Am
you
I
go.
unmuted now?
Yes.
Great.
Go ahead.
I tried the space bar and it didn't work. Maybe that's because I was typing. Anyway, I had a question back when we were on transportation on smart scale on putting resiliency in there, right? So on projects that we're doing resiliency, this is transportation projects, not some other kind of projects in smart scale, correct?
Right.
If we're doing
yes, Ms. Howard, that's correct. Yep.
Okay, and if we're doing resiliency, I would imagine that would be raising roads, bridges, that sort of thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
Well, great question and clarification. Thank you.
Okay, anybody? Cynthia?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One big player in all of this is VDOT. I know from my previous experience, and I'm sure Brad does too, getting VDOT to be at the table and to address a lot of these stormwater issues, because they also contribute a lot to the flooding, but they don't always take responsibility for the water that comes off of their highways. And so I just hope we include VDOT in any kind of future discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Last year, we as a body, by consensus, we agreed to ask Mr. Crum to draft a letter for us to send to the General Assembly supporting the legislative package. Would that be agreeable to do again this year for our members? Is there a consensus yes? Is there a consensus no? We're not supporting the package? Is there any discussion? Would somebody like to say something besides me?
Hold on. Can I say something?
Yeah, you got it. You're unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay. Since I don't believe that we discussed all of these things that are in the legislative agenda for us to have a position on them, I don't think we can support it.
Okay. Would anybody like to respond to that? Yeah, Carlton, and then George.
As Bob was going through the presentation, many of the things that he said, I recall having heard in various presentations over the past year. I think we should also realize this is not something that this group has created or adopted. This was created by our parent organizations. We are here to advise them, and I think some of the comments that Brad had are very good and things to be considered as part of that advice. But to simply say, well, I don't agree with the package, and so we shouldn't support it, you know, I'm not sure that's a good approach.
Okay, thank you. George?
Yeah, I kind of side down with Diana that since we didn't debate it and we, you know, there's parts of it I like, parts of it I don't, parts of it we haven't discussed at all. So lending credence to it or support of it, and when we didn't, you know, we weren't in the generation of it or in the review process for it, I think is overstepping where our role is. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else have any? Oh, go ahead, Christian.
Thank you. So I would tend to agree that while we may or may not support it on an individual basis, I'm not sure if it's the role of a community advisory committee to support a legislative agenda regardless of our personal feelings.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, and I just want to say, you know, thinking of the role of the CAC to inform your communities, to make them aware of work happening at the regional level. On this one, maybe your role, and I want to say first, I respect everybody's opinions, and there's going to be a variety of opinions about these issues. These are major issues, and they're very complicated issues, and there's a lot of perspectives. So it could be difficult for you all to take a position, and maybe your role is to inform your colleagues, you know, your neighbors, your residents about our regional legislative agenda, and allow them to form their opinion and what opinion they want to express to the legislators if they want to. Does that make sense? So many ways, you know, there's some things you might want to take a position on. There's some things you might be split on, but there's other things where you play an important role of pushing this information out to the community and helping us with that. And perhaps, Madam Chair, that might be the role related to this item.
Well, one of the other things that we did last year was encourage individual members to contact their General Assembly members and other local representatives to talk about parts of the package that they were particularly supportive of or had issues with. So I would suggest that we go there. Yeah, Delcino, and then Brad.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what Bob just said. I think part of our job is not just to advise, but also to communicate on behalf of the localities we represent. We're here. I represent Virginia Beach and certainly part of the region, but I think it's important to communicate the things that we're learning here. That the information shouldn't stop with us. That we have, I believe, that we have an obligation to share the information with the community. We're a public body, and so it's not so much form an opinion whether we voted up or down or support or don't support. And I think we need to share the information with the public, with those that we have influence with, And we don't have to have commentary on it. And we certainly wouldn't be speaking on behalf of the CAC. But as a member of the CAC, I think the onus is on us to make sure that we keep information out in front of the public. And those who do want to communicate to Bob or to the elected bodies can do so. But the information shouldn't stop with this body.
Yeah, Brad, in just a minute, I'd like to respond to that. There's a very easy way in some cities. I know our city has, our meetings are all open to, video right now. There are Zoom meetings and they're open to video, our city council meetings. And I had asked our mayor a couple of years ago to make sure that in the reports to council, he included information about what was going on the HRTPO and PDC so that the whole community would be informed by looking at the meetings. And we also use social media to spread the word. So there are ways of doing it to get the word out there. Brad?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't know if Bob can't put such a fine point on this, but maybe I can. I'm not positive what our endorsement or non-endorsement of this legislative agenda would do. I mean, we may be aggressively in favor of some of the items. We may be aggressively against some of the items. It's certainly customary for a city council or a board of supervisors or whatever to put forth a legislative agenda like this for the General Assembly to consider. These are things that the General Assembly is already considering, and I'm glad that Delcino made the point that it's really our job as kind of the televangelists of the HRPDC to go out and share the stuff that is critically important and that we have a knowledge base about with our individual constituents or neighbors or city citizens or whatever. So I'm happy to not vote on this and not endorse or not endorse this entire legislative package, but I'm also very happy to have it and know to go out to my constituents and be a broadcaster of these items.
Okay, great, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, thank you again for another presentation, Bob. And is there any old business that anybody wants to discuss? Yes, Mark. You're muted. You're muted, okay.
I was getting there. Got to get that cursor all the way up my big screen to the top. So in regard to the Love Virginia small business presentation we had at our last meeting, I would like to know if the sponsoring organization had developed any metrics to see what sort of impact that might have had and report that back to us.
Kendall, can you follow up with that?
Yeah, I can't hear. I'm trying to, he faded in and out. Can you repeat the last part of that, please?
Yes.
You faded in and out. That's better. Go ahead.
So if the small business initiative had any metrics, gathered any metrics from what they were putting forth, I'd be interested in seeing what sort of impact it did have.
So, okay, so I'll do some research on that. Bob, do you have an answer to that at all regarding the small business initiative?
I don't, yeah, but we could reach out to Lisa Renee Jennings and see what information you could share.
Yeah, I'll definitely, we haven't gotten anything back, but I think it's a good idea to close the circle and round back and find out. So I'll be happy to do that.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I do want to say for old new business, I do want to apologize, and I should have thought of this. We do have a new deputy executive director for the HRTPO, and she was here earlier, but is not. And you may remember her. Her name is Pavitra Pavatsarati, and she was here about a year after I started, and was here for maybe 2 years, and then left. With Mike Kimbrough's retirement, Pavitra has assumed his position and will be at CAC meetings And you know, you'll all get to say hello to her next meeting. And I apologize. I should have said something to you, Terry, like, oh, introduce Pavithra.
Okay.
For those of you who haven't met her, but
Would you like some more coffee?
No, I'm good, thanks.
no, but I would, I would like to, especially if you serve it.
Very funny. You're dismissed. Okay. Anybody else have anything? Yeah, Bob.
I'll mention very quickly because I want to respect your time, but I know this will be of interest to everyone. I wanted you to be aware that there is a regional effort occurring. I'm providing staff support to your chief administrative officers. Great concern that we need to increase the speed of the rollout of the vaccines for the COVID-19 virus. We reached out collectively as 17 city managers and county administrators earlier this week to the state. All 17 of our localities have inventoried how they can help and be part of the state team with trained individuals and staffs and resources that they could contribute to the vaccine rollout to help speed it up. As you can imagine, in order for municipal employees who are trained to be able to administer vaccines, there are liability issues, there are legal issues that need to be addressed in MOUs, and other things I won't bore you with bureaucratically. But I just want you to know that our localities are working collectively as a unit to do anything they can to assist the administration. And in fact, we have a phone call coming up tomorrow with our state partners to discuss that. So, Madam Chair, I don't mean to end the meeting with something that heavy, but I want you to know that there is a regional effort, and it involves your city managers and county administrators working very hard together, you know, to do what they can to be part of the statewide team to help with this effort. So thank you for the chance to just to mention that real quickly.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And that is on a positive note because they're trying to do something about it, which I think is very important. And there have been problems all over the country. So I know. Okay. Well, if there is no other business, if somebody would like to make a motion to adjourn, I'd be happy to consider it.
So move.
George and Brad. Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anybody object? Okay, great. Thank you all so much. I really especially appreciate the visuals. It did help a lot. And thanks both to Bob and Kendall for excellent presentations and giving us an opportunity to ask lots of questions. And I look forward to seeing you all in March. And in the meantime, there will be an exchange of information. So check your emails, okay?
Yeah, I will definitely reach out and ask you. I'll remind you of everything. Do you have any bylaw stuff and all that? I'll do that, okay? And training.
Great, perfect.
We have our second RTAP meeting tomorrow. So if anybody has any input, feel free to let me know. I'll certainly carry it on to that group.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you all once again, and see you again.